Hey, here we are in the Badger Rock kitchen, the downstairs kitchen, which we haven't done a workshop in a while. But this is the kitchen where we have gas stoves. So we are going to be showing you all the process of cooking down the maple sap into syrup. So I have Keely here too, who's a UW Badger volunteer who helps us out in the mornings, and she is here for her second semester. Woo woo! So she's going to assist with the syrup making process. So our trees, we only have two trees out there, two maple trees, and they are silver maples, not sugar maples. Sugar maples have more sugar in their sap, so you need less sap to make the same amount of syrup. So with a sugar maple, it's around like 30 gallons of sap to make 1 gallon of syrup. With silver maples, which is what we have, it's more like 40 gallons of sap to make 1 gallon of syrup. And the way you turn those 40 gallons of sap into syrup is you cook it. So traditionally, you would start cooking sap down outside. The reason is some of the sugar particles, as the water is evaporating off, are in that water vapor and can stick to your surfaces in your kitchen and make a sticky situation for your kitchen. But we cook it inside because also if you're doing small batches like we're doing, the sticky impact is like negligible. But if you're doing a lot of sap, you might want to start cooking it outside. And I can put a link in the comments how to make your own evaporator outside using some simple materials like cinder blocks and building a fire. You may have also heard of sugar shacks in the Northeast. Those are really common in like Vermont, the sugar maple capital of the states. Sugar shacks are an outdoor sugar maple sugaring shed that you can cook your syrup down so that you're not doing it inside. So if you want to come on over here and take a look at this maple sap, it looks basically like water, right? That is because it is mostly water at this point. It's like 95% water-ish and like 5% sugar and all the goodness. If you have never had a chance to drink maple sap straight out of the tree, please do. If you ever tap a tree, it's like the most invigorating spring tonic. It tastes like you're drinking a tree, a spring tree. I don't know how else to describe it, but it's a lovely taste. And if you see in there, there is some debris in the sap. And so one thing that we do before we cook it is we simply scoop the sap through a strainer, a fine mesh strainer. You can also use cheesecloth to make sure you get all that debris out so that you're not then having to filter syrup, which is a lot harder to filter because it's thick and sticky. So filter the water, and if you need to filter the syrup too, you can, but hopefully you won't need to filter the syrup. So we're going to start this process of cooking it. So Keely is going to help carry this big old bucket. We are currently getting about 5 gallons of sap every day from just the two trees that we have. We only have two trees. So imagine if you have a sugar bush, how much sap you could get a day per day. So don't, if it's your first time tapping, don't go out and tap 20, 30 trees unless you have a place in mind for storing all that sap. Because the other thing to know, that's all good. We don't want to make it too full because it could boil over. But what I was saying is make sure that you don't go crazy with your first tapping because you may end up with more sap than you have a place to store. And the thing is, you got to keep it cool until you cook it. And it only lasts for probably, I would say 10 days at the max is about what you want to keep it in the fridge before you process it into sap, or into syrup, I mean. So make sure you have a place to store it. You can, if you do have like a walk-in freezer, that's an amazing tool for maple sugaring time because then you can collect your sap and stick it in the freezer and pull it out when you're ready to process it and it lasts a little bit longer. So we just turned on the burners. Imagine outside what this would take, either if you're doing it with propane or a wood fire. You just have to keep the fire going for a long time. It can take like 12 to 18 hours to cook this down into syrup, depending on how you do it. So we'll just bring it to a full boil, and then we'll turn it down to so it's a rolling boil, but not a like crazy boil that's going to spill over the sides. And once the sap cooks down, we just keep adding fresh sap and cooking it down until we've processed the batch of sap that we have. When you're first boiling it and it still looks like water, you don't have to keep a close eye on it, but once it gets about half empty from being evaporated, you need to stick with this sap, because if you walk away and it hits that point where it just turns from syrup into charcoal, it happens like really fast. So you want to keep an eye, and you want to be stirring the sap occasionally, and when you get towards the end, you want to be stirring it frequently, to make sure that you don't burn it. So how you know when it's done, we will come back after this has boiled and I'll show you, but just kind of a rule of thumb guide, if you have a candy thermometer like this, this is a great tool, because once it gets to about 217 degrees, that is an indicator that your sap is probably done. You have to balance that out, because atmospheric conditions can change the exact temperature that it is finished, but 217-ish is about the goal. You can also do it if you don't have a candy thermometer. If you have a spoon, when you dip your spoon in the syrup and you kind of pour the syrup off the spoon, when it's done, it'll be like a sheet of syrup, thick sheet of syrup coming off the side of the spoon. So that's kind of like a visual test of if your syrup is done. If you finish it and you bottle it up before enough water is cooked off of it, it can mold and go funky on you. So just make sure that it's actually finished. But if you cook it too long, you're going to end up with, first, maple caramel, which is actually delicious. But it's not syrup, it's more like a caramel. Or if you keep cooking beyond that, you can even make maple sugar, which is actually traditionally in native communities, that is what maple syrup was cooked down into, was the sugar for transporting. It's a lot easier to transport sugar than to transport syrup. So just thinking about that too, as a way you could cook it down even further to make the sugar. So we're going to let this boil for a long time. We are going to keep an eye on it so we don't burn it and get the fire trucks over here. And we will tune y'all back in when we're a little bit closer to done, so you can see what that looks like. So one thing I forgot to say is that the surface area of your pan matters. So the bigger the surface area, the quicker your sap is going to cook down into syrup. So if you can have a long, more shallow pan, that's way better than like a big, deep pot, because that increased surface area will just get the water evaporating off a lot quicker. So I just wanted to throw that in there before we tune you all out, so that we can tune you all back in a while to see how it's going. All right, so here we are back after a few hours, and you can see these two pans were filled to the brim not that long ago, and you can see the sap is cooking. It's starting to have a little froth on the top, and it's starting to change color. See how it's starting to turn a little bit less clear, and a little bit, you can see a little bit of dark brown kind of starting to sneak into that sap. So this is the point where you don't want to leave it for too long unattended anymore. Just keep an eye on it, and you can see about 3/4 of it has already cooked down. So we're just going to keep an eye, and yeah, this is 10 gallons of sap has turned into this in just a few hours. So we'll be back again when we're even closer to it and show you how we're doing then. All right, you all. So a few hours later, come on over and see where the sap is. So if you remember, we had this in 2 full to the brim hotel pans this size this morning, and now it is all almost cooked down, and look how kind of golden brown it's getting. So this is the stage where you really don't want to abandon it, and you want to be stirring it frequently. So I'm just in here stirring, and I'll use my little candy thermometer to see if it's close to 217 Fahrenheit. And really, when we get close enough to, I'll show you the spoon test, which is pouring it off the spoon and seeing how it falls off the spoon. If it falls like a sheet, that is your sign that it is ready to go. So yeah, just wanted to update y'all. I turned it off so you could see what it's looking like through the steam, but turning it back on and keep it cooking. Here we are back again, y'all, a little bit later. If you peek in here, you can see this sap that looked like water when we started is now thick, and it kind of sheets along the bottom of the pan, which shows that it's thick and syrupy. When I was cooking it earlier, there was a moment when it started foaming. There was just a lot of white foam all of a sudden came up from the sap. That is your sign that your syrup is so close to done. So really, I wait for it to foam up, and then I let it go for a couple more minutes, and then usually you're done. So when I was talking about the syrup sheeting off the spoon, see how it kind of looks like thick as it pours off, almost like it's falling in a curtain. So that's another sign that it's likely done. If you want to be for sure, you can get something called a syrup hydrometer. So there are two different kinds of hydrometers. There's a sap hydrometer, which shows the sugar content of the sap fresh out of the tree. And then there is a syrup hydrometer, which is different. That's for testing your syrup. So if you're using a hydrometer, you can put it in your syrup. There is a hot reading and a cold reading, so make sure you're looking at the right one. But if your syrup is room temperature, your hydrometer reading should be about 66 to 67 to show you that that syrup is done and sugary enough. That means it's got little enough water in there that it's not going to rot, and the water's not going to spoil the syrup, but it also means it's not overcooked and is going to turn into caramel. So it's kind of, you start to get the feel for it when you've made syrup a few times. But you can see, I'm going to actually scoop some of this into a jar, and you can see what it looks like, the finished product. So it's a little bit looser when it's hot. So if your syrup is still hot and you feel like it's too watery, don't panic. When it cools, it's likely going to thicken up quite a decent amount. I'm just going to pour this in here. And if you did not strain it as you poured it into the pan to cook it, you definitely want to strain it on the way out. But it's a little bit harder to strain syrup than it is to strain sap because it's a lot more sticky and thick. So I usually do it on the way in, and honestly, I usually skip it on the way out, although some people do both. So here we go, y'all. So we had about 10 gallons of sap that we started with. So if you think about that ratio, 40 gallons of sap to 1 gallon of syrup, this is going to give us about 4 cups of syrup from the 10 gallons of sap that we collected. And I have some good news. Our trees are producing even more today. I told you this morning that they were producing our 2 trees 5 gallons a day. Today we got almost 9. So they are really going for it. So this is the time, y'all, if you are in western Wisconsin, southeastern Wisconsin, what part of Wisconsin are we in? Southern Wisconsin, to check your trees and see how they're going. So yeah, syrup jar number 1 of hopefully many to come. Feel free to pop any questions in the comments, and if you try this at home, have a lot of fun, enjoy it, and keep an eye on it towards the end, please. Don't burn your syrup. Although if you do, no guilt. We've all been there. All right, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see y'all next time.